All right. Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Paul Grand, CEO here at MedTech Innovator. Welcome to MedTech Innovator Live. This is our APAC edition. So MedTech Innovator is an accelerator for those of you who've never been here before. We focus on downstream companies. So we're not looking for people with an idea. We're looking a little further downstream for the types of people who are working on an innovation that has already validated a bit of its market need, that's done some of the work in terms of early customer discovery, and making sure that these companies have a place in the overall healthcare ecosystem, that they really have a need they've uncovered. We want to make sure that they're going to be successful in terms of the market. We want to validate their technologies, want to help them make sure that when these products come to the market, that they get there with the value that's appropriate so that people can buy these technologies and they don't just sit on the shelf. We make sure that in our Asia Pacific program, the companies have the guidance they need to expand beyond one market. So someone may be developing a technology in Korea and they want to get into other markets in the Asia Pacific. They may want to get to the US or Europe, and we help them with all those things. So as part of all those efforts, we take the questions from our various companies during our accelerator program, and we use that to design a program of experts who can come online and answer their questions as part of what we do in our process. And an easy and convenient way of getting lots of questions answered is through these webinars. So what we do is we not only take the input from our companies in advance about things they're interested in talking about, but we share that with you. So you have the ability, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you have the ability to watch some of this curriculum and see the discussion that normally we would have behind closed doors with just our cohort and these experts. So welcome. I'm glad you're here. If you're here on YouTube, you can follow us at medtechinnovator.org/live to see the archives of our Asia Pacific program and our US program, as well as medtechinnovator.org/APAC live. So that's where you go to find the information about our past events, this current discussion, as well as upcoming ones. If you're on YouTube and you post a question in the little YouTube chat box, we will do our best to answer it during this next hour. And for those of you who are here from our cohort, as always, you put your questions into the Q&A box on Zoom. We will get to those at the end of the discussion, or if it's something that I think merits being brought up in the middle of the discussion, I'll certainly weave that into the conversation. So that's how this is going to work. Certainly we have our chat opportunity, and you're welcome to drop some things into the chat box as well, but mainly for the cohort, again, put your questions in Q&A. So with that, let's talk about today's discussion. One of the things that I've learned over the last decade of MedTech Innovator and 12 years of venture capital before that is that manufacturing in supply chain is not what you expect at the outset. Everyone goes into these companies with a general idea of what their product is going to be, and you have kind of your prototypes, and you're thinking about getting these products to patients as quickly as possible and getting through your regulatory studies and other things. And you're thinking usually about just that kind of period of time. I just got to get through regulatory. I just got to get on the market. And the problem is that there are a lot of things that happen in the prototype, early, first generation product stage that will not scale when you get to manufacturing and you get to the market. And there's also a lot of surprises that come up. For example, I've had companies that, I know who have their product approved and get all that early clinical validation done, and they get, a big fundraise and everyone's excited to get to the market. And then they go off to get that scale and to get their manufacturing ramped up. And what they thought was going to be maybe 6 months to getting to the market is years away from getting to the market at scale. So we're going to talk about that and many other things today. And I've got some great experts who are going to be here as part of the conversation from number one of the world's or the world's largest manufacturer of medical devices from Jabil. We have a couple representatives who I'm going to introduce. And then also one of the MedTech Innovator alumni from last year is going to share some of his experience. So it's going to be a fun discussion, and I'm excited to introduce our panelists. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce today's panelists so you can get a chance to get to know them briefly, and then we'll get into the discussion. So I'm going to start off first with Jim Warren. So Jim has been working with us for a couple of years over at Jabil, and he's staying up late with us today. Like me, I'm on the West Coast, as I believe Jim is as well here in the United States. So Jim, we'll start off with you because I know it's later in the day. So Jim, introduce yourself. Tell us about yourself and Jabil.
Absolutely. So Jim Warren, and what's referred to as a business unit director at Jabil. Responsibility of a business unit director is not just to chase business and gain new customers, but there's a big responsibility to own that customer, the P&L, all the operational activity. And how we do that is we build business unit directors out of long tenured employees like myself. So I'm celebrating my 24th year in Jabil. I've worked in the US. Right now I'm located in Las Vegas, but I was also at one point in Malaysia and also in China. For the company. And for those who are curious, Jabil is simply just James and Bill pushed together. That's how we get a Jabil. As Paul mentioned, we're the largest manufacturer of medical devices. But I think the business unit model that I represent is something that allows us to work with both large scale and small scale customers. So it's fun, and I enjoy meeting with a lot of the startups, and I do that on a regular basis to talk about the challenges they have and what Jabil might be able to do to help them out. Also, we spend a lot of time talking about what it can take to take a startup up to scale that can then be a part of an organization like Jabil. So I'm really excited to be here. I love the MedTech environment and the ecosystem that Paul and the team have created. It's always fun to get together and have these discussions. So I'm really excited to hear the questions this evening. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Great to have you here. And let's go to your colleague, CY. So tell us a little about yourself.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jim. So this is my first year participating on this MedTech Innovator. I'm glad to be invited for this call, for this webinar. So Jim has give good introductions on the Jabil side. So I'll just talk about myself. So I'm CY, so Senior Business Development Manager for Jabil Healthcare in the Asia region. So I'm based in Shanghai. So over in Asia, we have a couple of healthcare facilities. One of the biggest one is in Asia, and also in Penang, Malaysia, Singapore, and also in Shenzhen that we do a lot of disposables over there. So my role is to look for partners, to qualify some of the opportunities, and also to observe what are the technologies in the market, how Jabil should prepare ourselves, what are the technology that we should invest and acquire in order to empower our customers to be successful in the market.
That's terrific, and I have to say that's. In particular, something you just said there made me think about, something I want to get into a little bit later, which is how you do predict, what kinds of technologies you're going to need to bring in and acquire to better serve all those customers. So we'll get into that a little bit later. Remind me if I forget. But thank you for that intro. As I said, it's great working with Jabil. It's nothing like having the world's largest manufacturer of medical technology to answer your questions. So thank you both for being here. And now let's go to Amrish. So Amrish, as I mentioned, is one of our alumni, and he's going to tell you a little bit about himself and his company. So Amrish, you want to go ahead and tell us about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks for the invite as well. My name's Amrish, and I'm the co-founder of Biorhythm, which is a company looking to solve problems in access to care for pregnancy. And we're doing that by developing a remote monitoring platform, which women can perform medical grade maternal and fetal monitoring anywhere, anytime, and be able to escalate emergency cases. And so that way, what we're looking to how we're looking to achieve that is actually by building devices which allow the monitoring of mother and baby. We're in a slightly unique situation where we monitor a patient that cannot be seen, felt, or heard. And that's why it's a really unique challenge in building a sensor that can do that. And, together with that, the companion mobile applications, the clinical front end. But coming from a software background, I think I found hardware design and manufacturing to be some of the most challenging aspects of building the startup. And, like we'll dive into later, some of the more interesting challenges through the journey as well. So yeah, thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much. Great having you here, Amrish, and having you back. One thing I'll point out as well is that I always tell people it's great to get out of your ecosystem and get out of your echo chamber in your backyard. Amrish is living that for sure. In addition to being part of our program and there in Singapore, I've also seen Amrish now in San Francisco and in Dublin, Ireland, and he's definitely getting around. So great job, Amrish, in getting out. Good stuff. So we're going to talk about all sorts of things today. I wanted to start off, Amrish, with you just telling us a little more. You mentioned your product in helping to monitor these pregnancies, but tell us a little more just maybe about what stage you're at in terms of your product's development. You're still pre-commercial, so tell us kind of where you are in the process at this point.
So following our quality process, we are in the final phases of development, and so we're pre-commercialization. We're going through our final clinical validation, and in the US. We've already done a whole bunch of patients outside of the US, so we're just finishing that up, and hence getting product into the final phases, right? Usability, clinical, and the final bits of validation. And manufacturing is a really important part of that. So we're in the business end of things, as I'd like to say. This is where it gets critical, where every dollar you spend actually counts. You got to keep a very close eye on timelines, dollars, budgets. This is where I would say the attention to detail is particularly important. And even though it's process driven, it's a very process driven time for us. But I think it requires the focus, attention, and dedication of the whole team. So manufacturing is not the responsibility of the contract manufacturer purely. And so I think it's essential that we work together with them. So I think that's why, the whole team's engaged. Right now, we're in the final stages of that validation piece where we're looking to submit for the FDA pretty soon.
Excellent. That's great. Okay, so we got a good set then in terms of understanding context-wise where you are. So you mentioned that manufacturing isn't just the responsibility of a contract manufacturer, that you've got to have some ownership of that as well in-house. So I want to talk a little bit about timing as to when somebody gets involved with that that outside manufacturer, and obviously when you hear Jabil's the largest manufacturer in the world for medical technology, and you manufacture for people like J&J and everybody else, it makes you think, I guess we get involved with you guys way down the road, way later after our product's already finished and we want to scale. Maybe that's when I get involved with somebody like you. But is that wrong? Do I want to get involved with you earlier? So Jim and CY, dispel that myth if that's a myth.
That's a huge myth, Paul. Or it's a huge myth, Paul. I'm going to have Amrish talk to all my customers, because I think the earlier the engagement, the better. I think there's a lot of things that we've seen early on that we often think, wow, if they would have come to us just a couple of years earlier, or if they would have come to us 6 months earlier. When you're the largest manufacturer of medical devices, you see a little bit of everything. You see the good and you see the bad. Inside of Jabil, we have a developed best processes plan, and it's where all of our factories around the world get together and share. Same thing happens inside the business unit. And one of the things we often say is people don't know what they don't know. And that's a problem for a lot of companies where they think they've got themselves lined up for an opportunity. And unfortunately, they're lining themselves up for a potential failure. And we see it time and time again. That's why I say, we're a 32 going to 32 plus $billion company, but I love talking to startups. If you've got 100,000, 200,000 or $2 million, I want to talk to you because it isn't about how much is it going to cost for you to talk to me. Discussions with me are free. I can give you my advice. I can tell you what my thoughts are. I can guide you down a path of what I've seen to be successful. And I think CY and I, when we're talking to customers, we often have to remind them that I'm agnostic to where you build your device, in all honesty, in the med tech space. What I want to do is get that in the hands of caregivers and patients. And for that to happen, we want to make sure that you've got a solid supply chain and you have a good manufacturing scalability. And so I like the discussions. And I think sometimes people think, oh, it's just a sales tactic. He wants to talk to us because ultimately he's going to send us a bill. That's not what I do. I'm very interested in imparting the knowledge that I've learned over the years because I don't want to see other companies fail. I don't want to see you burn money. And Amrish is talking about those things where every dollar counts. And yeah, in a 32 plus $1 billion company, we can spread some of those losses around, but in startups, they can't. So, for us, it's important to be able to impart that knowledge on the smaller companies because we do want to see them go on to scale, potentially get acquired by, as you mentioned, Paul, J&J, which ultimately end up building a Jabil. So things like that I think a lot of times the earlier the better for me. I love talking early. I've had conversations on just ideas where we have an idea about a product that going to look like this and it's going to do that. What do you think about it? Well, I've got some ideas. I'm a finance and economics guy, but I've seen a lot. And in a lot of cases, I can tell you what's going to be the right path to take in order to achieve that. Or in a lot of cases, I used to do when I was living in China, I'd have 400 people a year that I'd talk to. And maybe two of them, I would say, yeah, I think that's a great idea. Other times, I'll be honest with you, I'll tell you if I think you're going down a wrong path. And that's not to say that what Jim thinks is law, but it'll give you a guide point to say, all right, well, maybe we need to change our pitch, which I think in a lot of cases, that's what people don't get to hear is that, both CY and I are very open and honest when we're talking to customers and potential customers that, well, what we believe is going to be successful or not. So earlier, the better, for sure. CY, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
CY is muted still.
Okay. Well, just to echo a few points from James is that, the earlier we participate on the discussion, the earlier that we can provide a solution that can help the customer be successful. So I would see that, Jabil is definitely not a product expert. You guys are probably the product expert that your clinical solution for your patient care, but as contract manufacturers, we have solutions for manufacturing, for supply chain, and a lot of time with the technology that requires for a product. So, changes is cost a lot. It's very expensive to do any changes when your product goes down path to the manufacturing. So the earlier that JB can participate, from design stage, from DFM, we have a big knowledge on, a great team, intelligence on, about design for cost, design for manufacturing, design for quality, design for test. All these are solutions that will be helpful for your product. So the early, when you come to the stage of validation, looking for a partner or looking for manufacturers, a lot of time we can't change because your product has been registered, your product has been validated. As a partner, it will cost a lot to ask you to change. So and a lot of time, especially we are in the stage of supply chain challenges. When you can't change, when you do not have a multiple solutions on some of the components, it make it very difficult for your part to be cost effective, to be resilient in the market. So these are some of the few points I want to add on. Thank you.
Those are really good points. So I heard let's talk to you early, and that it's not expensive. In fact, it might even be free to talk to you early. And again, that's I just want to make sure people understand that I can tell you, having worked with Jabil now for several years, that's true. And that there's a huge number of companies that we've, introduced Jabil to through MedTech Innovator that have spent a lot of time talking to Jim and CY and others at Jabil. And again, that doesn't cost them anything to have those conversations. It just saves everyone money down the road. Is really the kind of where we're going with this, I think. So let's move on a little bit. One of the things that you can't talk about supply chain without talking about disruption these days. And that's unfortunate, but that's the first thing that comes to mind when I think supply chain right now. Is I think about resilience and disruption and all these things. So I just want to kind of get us like to a little bit of an understanding of what the current state of affairs is in terms of supply chain, and in particular. We'll talk about Asia, but we can talk about other markets as well. But I just want to start off with that. Like, where are we at this point? Are disruptions over and everything's back to normal? Where are we, guys? So again, Jim, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I'm having no issues, Paul. So I don't know what everyone's been talking about. Everything's been fine.
Excellent.
So now I think a lot of people have different views of this and the crystal ball and. It's a lot of macroeconomic events, and those aren't things that are easily understood or dismissed in a lot of cases. We've seen expansion in consumer electronics. The stay-at-home requirements that COVID drove was driving storage requirements. Right now, electric vehicles is a big thing, but also technology continues to move forward, and that's great in a lot of ways. So. When we talk about that, we look at the 5G, how that came in, and now they're talking to go to 6G. All of that requires a constraint on the supply chain and availability of parts. The problem is that creates a ripple. So if you think about ICs being the main driver for the supply chain disruption, cap manufacturers, metal manufacturers, even packaging manufacturers aren't going to continue to manufacture at the rate they were before. They're going to use that as their gating item. So when those companies come down, being able to spend back up in some cases is easy, in other cases is hard. The IC industry, the level of technology that we're seeing in ICs now is requiring some of those locations to take 2 to 3 years to bring up a new site. And that's been a big challenge for groups like Taiwan Semiconductor. So when we think about that, we look at disruption going forward. But that's not to say that can impact your device. There's ways around that. There's ways in your design that you can adjust. One of the things that CY and I advocate for is open up an Android or an iOS device. And if your parts don't look like what's in there, then you're going down the wrong design path, because those are the folks that are continuing to get parts. If you look at someone like Tesla and their quarterly earnings, they still met their demand. If you're going to see Apple, you're going to see a similar trend. I think what'll be the offset for that is some of the costs. So the costs are going up significantly for labor and freight. And those areas will be more impactful. A lot of countries are trying to offset inflation by increasing their rate. That ultimately will take a while to take an impact. But overall, I think there are some smart things, and we can talk about that later, that you can be doing with your product and your design to avoid getting tied into a specific part that may or may not become available for the next, who knows, number of weeks. But certainly, Paul, there's a lot of creative solutions out there that to get around these issues. These issues, in my perception, aren't going to be going away for 2 to 3 years. I think we're going to be struggling in this environment for a while. One of the things, unfortunately, that will free up some of that is those companies that are going under. So as those companies start to go under and they no longer need those parts, it starts to become available. That's certainly not what we want to see in the med tech space.
Agreed. I do not want to see companies going under to free up capacity for other people. But yes, it is a fact for sure. So what about Asia versus other markets like the U.S.? Are some of the things that you're seeing and some of the impacts affecting companies in the Asia Pacific region differently? Like for example, if you're closer to the source of where chips are made, is it easier to get them faster, or is it more just is this something that affects everybody reasonably equally?
Pretty much equal across the board right now, Paul. I've got customers that are based out of Asia. I've got our factories in Asia that CY can tell you the challenges there. It's not something that we look at one region and go, oh, if you're manufacturing in Hawaii and that's where your product is, you're going to be fine. It's like, no, you're across the board. You're going to have issues, unfortunately, at this point.
Okay. And you've already addressed a little bit about, the fact that this is probably going to, again, without a crystal ball, that this will probably last for a while, for several years to come. But that there are some smart things you can do to adjust. In addition to just cracking open an Android phone or an iPhone and making sure your parts look like that. I know there's lots of other things, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. So I want to move back over to Amrish then for a minute. And just again, setting some more context, as the CEO at Biorhythm, how involved are you in your manufacturing? Is that in the supply chain? Is that stuff, you mentioned before that, you've got to own some of that at the company and not just contract that out. So, how involved are you personally in that? And I think you're muted.
Yeah, so it affects the operations of the company, and hence it's got my attention, right? So it's and I think it really starts with the claims you're trying to make for each device, and how you're designing and making sure the devices are manufactured that can meet those marketing claims, but also looking at scale, BOM costs, how you manage timelines because of supply chain disruptions. All these are risks and expectations that you have to communicate outwards, right? Even if it's getting down to the level of talking to your suppliers and potentially having a minor redesign, like Jim said, swapping out components so that they're potentially easier to get, looking at the secondaries market and how you can actually buy stuff off that. It affects cost, timeline, scale, and basically how we sell our product, right? So I'm pretty heavily involved. I don't do the day-to-day work per se, but it affects the way I present the company outwards. And I think that's a really, really important part of my job, right? It's to tell people who want to understand the risks of investing, who want to understand the timelines for partnerships. All these things come into play whenever, and all these manufacturing related items come into play whenever I'm having those conversations. So very, 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 very impacted by manufacturing. And that's why we kind of get it. That's why we got to get it right. So, and it was a different conversation at every stage of the journey, when we had 1, when we had 10, when we had 100, when we had 1,000, right? So, so it's about evolving that conversation and making sure I understand the process as well as anyone in the company. So yeah, it's been a very, very big part of my work.
Good. I'm glad to hear that you've got your eye on that ball. So continuing on that a little bit, in terms of you contracted out, obviously, as you said, some of the work, I imagine. So maybe just tell us a little bit about that, about the process you kind of went through to choose a partner, and again, what do you control in-house and what is outsourced?
So I mean, on our journey from like one device that nearly exploded to like 1,000 that we need to put on patients, we've gone through different processes, different steps, all the way from in-house to getting out. But I think, like Jim said, it's about getting the manufacturers in as early as possible, even for a conversation, right? Because you're looking at design for manufacturing, choice of components, how can you stabilize the design as early as possible? And I think we've gone from 3D printing parts where it's 1 to 5 parts to considering building soft tools for small scale production. So it's, and all the way to actually where we are right now, which is our final, which is our frozen design. But it's important to get a manufacturer who understands the process from 1 to 1,000. And who can work with you from that, who can work with you with that. So it's not the same process. It's not going to be, after 3 years, you're not going to look the same. And if it is the same, it's problematic, right? Because it means you didn't go through an appropriate scaling of your process as well. So so we work very closely. And the reason I say we take ownership of this in-house is we drive that process with great advice from our manufacturer, from our designers, industrial designers. And so making sure our industrial designers and our manufacturers are speaking constantly is actually one of the things that our product team's been great at. And we've faced our challenges over the years, product component non-conformities, whatever it is, right? Bad suppliers and bad vendors. But just making sure if all three are in the loop is the best way to make sure that your product development goes on nonetheless. So yeah, we've had the privilege of working with great designers and a really great manufacturer here in Singapore as well.
Great. Well, let me stick with you for one more question, and then we'll go back to Jabel, which is when you look back at what you've learned so far. You're at Design Freeze now, so you've gone quite far. So when you look back, I know there's some surprises, as you kind of mentioned before, and you alluded to timelines that really surprised you and other things. So maybe share a little bit of that with us about what are some things that surprised you now looking back.
So everyone thinks that the complexity of component directly drives the attention you pay to it, which is generally true, but we found out that the smallest components can just really throw you off, right? And it can be a capacitor. For us, it was like a gold pin that needed to bend 90 degrees, and we found out that not many people could do that reliably. And it was so frustrating. It was a gold pin literally that big that had a 90-degree bend to it that causes the longest design. It causes the most design changes because it kept failing first inspection. And so it's about looking at every component and making sure that your device is built so that it is as easy as possible to source for, easy as possible to manufacture, and not adding any additional complexity unnecessarily, right? So I think that's one of the biggest surprises, is that even the smallest things can throw you off. And it was just a wildly frustrating experience in between. But yeah, it's just one of those things you learn, and you learn to mitigate for, right? But yeah, don't underestimate even the smallest component, and that's the biggest thing that surprised me in manufacturing, I would say.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. And as you said, a capacitor or a pin that you go like, that's not going to hurt us, and that's not going to slow things down. But yeah, it can be something that's simple. And maybe let me ask one more question, and then I'll go back to Jabel, which is just about supply chain. So you mentioned mitigating some of these things. So when you think about going from 1 to 1,000. You're getting to the point where you're getting close now to getting to the market. What are some things that you've done to mitigate risk, especially in this environment?
So I mean, particularly with the electronics, like Jim says, with ICs, it's about being sensible, and in this case, looking at simple redesigns where it involves component swaps, for example, and doing that as early as possible, knowing it could take anywhere between 6 to 18 months. And the dangerous part here is that nobody can give you a certain timeline on these things, and so the earlier you do it, the better. The earlier you pull the trigger, the better. So it's all about making a call with about an 80% certainty, about a 70 to 80% certainty that this is going to work. And so, we're taking the steps to, redesign, swap out components, and making sure we source additional vendors for every component as well. So making sure all these are well sourced, stocked, and supply chains has hit us. And like you say, it may not be the point where we go to market, but maybe the point where we try to scale. We need product from not just 6 months from now, but for the 6 to 12 months from now as well. We can't just have product and that's it. It's about anticipating demand and building for that. Because right now, given the timelines, you have to, and it's about managing expectations with the customers as well. So supply chain is all about managing our own expectations, but with the potential customers as well. And I think that's going to be a really important part of the supply chain crisis and the uncertainty it brings to the whole process.
Yeah, good point. In our U.S. program webinar series, we have a whole webinar this Thursday talking about the hospital supply chain. And I'm going to bring up some things we're talking about today with them. But let's come back to this discussion. So Jim and CY. So you heard a little bit from Amrish now about some of the things that he's been focusing on, and some of the ways in which he's mitigating some of his risk. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts, comments on what you've heard so far, and things that you're seeing with your other clients that sound similar to that.
Sure. Well, first off, I would say, Amrish, this is a great time for you to be a CEO. You're getting experience that no other CEOs have had. So if anything, there's a silver lining in this, that you'll never think about a 90-degree gold pin the same way. So I think in that regard, at least, I think about some of the CEOs of startups that are suffering through this right now, and I think they're getting a master class in supply chain, which in a lot of cases in years past was an afterthought. We often thought about supply chain as, how does the orange get from the tree to the produce stand? That was supply chain. One of the things that I've seen a lot of folks do is it's required designers to put on their thinking cap. A lot of times you'll be offered up an IC from, say a large manufacturer gives you an IC and says, this is what you should use. And in fact, not only will I sell this to you, but I'll do all the design, the circuit design around the outside of the board for you, as long as you buy mine and you spec it in and it's sole sourced. A lot of cases, that part that they're selling you, you're going to use 10% of its capacity. And when designers step back and they look at it and say, I don't need that one IC. Yeah, it looks pretty on the board, but I have the real estate to use 3 microprocessors, a crystal, handful of caps and resistors. You get creative. And I think it's forcing us to look at that differently. I equate it in the supply chain world to a mom and pop trying to use SAP. SAP is one of the largest ERP systems in the world. And when you have big corporations, it's great for that. But even Jabil, we use one instance of SAP over 110 sites around the globe. And I've been told at times that we still don't use the full width and capabilities of SAP. So I think about that, about the ICs as well, that sure, it looks cool if you have that one IC in the board, it looks pretty, but how often do you want your device opened up and looked at? And so I think there's that passion right now of designers that want to learn how to do things quick and easy is kind of gone by the wayside. They want to start doing their own design, and they want to take out those parts with a 12, 16-week lead time. That was fine 3 years ago, but now that lead time could be 52 weeks. It's ridiculous. So I think there's a lot of that's going on at the moment. One thing I'll note is Amrish, you mentioned the secondary market. We've cautioned our customers about using the secondary market without us involved. So Jabil uses a select number of suppliers. We do that because in times like this, there are bad actors out there who want to take advantage of the situation. In contract manufacturing and manufacturing in general, when you're setting up a machine, you use blank parts. And those are parts that you use them, you can throw them away. It's not like you're using a real component. Well, people are getting a hold of those and they're silk screening on top the manufacturer's part number and selling them. That's a scary situation, because when you're on a tight budget, given fake parts, and all of a sudden now you're trying to do a qualification. And so it's scary. So I think you want to make sure you've got a trusted and licensed and bonded broker who also has test capabilities. Is extremely important. We've also seen in a lot of cases, people taking a design that they planned on shelving because they're going to go their next generation, because we know how that's always about the next generation and next generation. A lot of companies right now are looking at their current generation and going, well, we've got parts for it. There's a couple of obsoletes that we can swap out, and we can refresh the outside of this, but we can keep on going. So I think there's different routes that different people are taking based on size and available cash. The other thing I would caution folks on is, especially in startups, you have a limited amount of capital, and you have to use that wisely. Going off and buying 5 years worth of one IC because you think that's going to save you might actually cause you more harm than good. So it's really careful about how you use your money, who you deal with, and also what to expect from your designers. I know now more than ever, when a design is done, our supply chain team used to look at it after the fact. Now they're in there at the beginning. So we talk about startups coming to Jabil early. Our designers are going to our supply chain early and asking them, is this part on the obsolescence pathway? If so, what's a good alternative? And I think we're seeing that more and more, where designers and supply chain are getting together and having those conversations. And it's pulling us closer together, which is just going to make us stronger in the future. And right now, we're just kind of going through this battle together. I know CY specifically and a lot of the customers that he deals with, and he can speak to this, but they're facing the same challenges as startups. It's not just startups that are seeing it. Large manufacturers as well are struggling mightily with new designs as they prepare to launch them. And in some cases, it has to do with antiquated design methodology.
That is really that's really helpful to kind of have some of that context, especially when you're thinking about these new, as you said, these are whether they're large or small companies, they're working on products. They're thinking about things that might be proprietary and that they want to lock in, and I've heard companies tell me that they're stockpiling. Oh, I'm stockpiling 3 years of that chip, or 3 years of that that component, to make sure that I'm going to have supply, or 2 years or whatever. And as you just pointed out, maybe that's not such a great idea all the time. I've even heard people in our portfolio talking about buying a provider, someone who makes a component, and just to make sure they have the the bandwidth for their needs. They're like, I'm just going to buy that kind of nuanced company that makes this one thing, so that I know that they're available for us when we need them. Again, are these maybe just a little more, Jim and CY, on that? Like, are there things that what are some things that if buying 3 years of stock isn't the right solution, what are some things that you're advising people to do on a regular basis? What should people in our audience be thinking about? I'm a young company and I've got I'm trying to go from 1 to 1,000 and all that. What are as you said, having a lens on obsolescence obviously is really important, but what are some other things that people should think about?
And CY, I'll make a couple of comments and I'll let you jump in. I think that simplifying your design, and I don't mean consolidating all the activities to one IC that's in the middle of the board and does everything. I think it's simplifying in that, looking at parts with anything longer than an 8-week lead time, ask yourself why. If you're looking at something that has a 12 to 16 week, boutique components sound great in the beginning. But like you said, Paul, if you have to go off and acquire a company in order to maintain your supply, unless you're Tesla or Apple, I don't think that's a good idea. I don't necessarily think you have the cash to do that. And the other thing about those boutique opportunities is a lot of the challenges we have right now are based on labor and raw materials, and those are affecting everybody, whether you've controlled the supply or not. So CY, I don't know if you have any other thoughts around that, but I think it's really about simplification and understanding your product and the parts that you're using.
Yeah, what I have in mind is that time to market. Time to market is so critical. So it's not only for the big operations, but also for a startup. So a lot of time as a designer, so they would like to design for the best product in markets, to compete in the market. But things are moving so quickly now. Technology are advancing so quickly. There are so many disruptions in the market now. So, as a CEO, a lot of time you have to make a call. Would these chips, is it fit for your current product, or would you like to plan it for your next phase or refresh or next gen? So you have to make a call. So, time is money. So, like what Jim said. So, make your product simple. You may want to plan ahead of time. What's the market need right now, and you have to push the product to the market as quickly as possible. A lot of time, we have to compromise in order to get the best value. Yeah. So this is what I can comment. Yeah.
Let me ask one clarifying question for both of you, for either of you. And when you talk about making a product simple, are you're referring to the simplicity in the design versus making the product itself like less feature, having less features or having less, things that make it special, let's say, is I guess what I'm getting at. Is that right? Like when you say make it simple, what do you mean?
Well, it's interesting, and I thought about this when you were mentioning about his background in software. What we're seeing is a lot of the features are actually moving to software away from hardware. And that's because those features are readily available. You have a good coder, you have someone who can generate that. I think eloquent design is difficult to define in a lot of cases. I think there's concepts around minimalism, and when you look at a device and you say, "Oh, it's beautiful," well, that's the beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And in this case, in a lot of cases, it's the beauty's in the eye of the investor, right? So they see something, they think it's great. But my thought has always been that you want to make as simple a device on the inside as possible. Now, I think that's become easier with the use of software to generate a lot of what you're looking for the device to do. But you have to ask yourself, how far down the strategic roadmap do you want to go? Are you thinking 5 or 10 years and this device is going to last that long? Or are you going to regen and spin? And there's a big difference between innovation and iteration. And I think what we're seeing right now, because of the supply chain issues, is a lot of people are iterating and claiming it's innovation. I think ultimately that'll come to a stop at some point, that we'll understand what true innovation in the marketplace is again. But I think it's been a little bit diluted. But I don't think we should stop making complex devices that do complex things. But I think what we have to do is look at the background of that and understand, how is it designed? How is it laid out? What are the parts that are selected? And how do I get more out of each part that I'm using on the board? And don't get lazy. I think lazy leads to sloppy design, just having one part that does a bunch of things and maybe you're not using all of it. I think we have to hold the designers accountable and make sure that they're stretching the value of each component that's on that. You don't want to have anything on your board that doesn't need to be there, but you also don't want to leave your strategic roadmap short. So as CY said, it's a big decision for CEOs to understand where to place their money and how to bridge that gap, for sure.
Yeah, no, thank you for clarifying that. Amrish, let me go back to you for a second. Would you say your device is simple? Do you think in terms of its design, do you feel pretty good about that? I think we got you muted still.
Yeah, I think we've kept it as simple as we could, whilst it met the requirements, right? I think we looked at what was needed at the very basic level to meet the requirements we needed. Some of it had to involve some complexity because of the requirements. It was naturally a little bit more difficult to do with simple processes, and so we needed some complex processes in there. But like, what Jim was talking about with the board, right? Don't sell yourself short, but don't overcomplicate things at the same time. For us, that could even mean, buying it from a vendor who meets almost all of our requirements, right? Rather than redesigning something that's already out there. So for a couple of components, that was the case. It's about keeping it as simple as possible, keeping it focused. And I think when you keep it simple, I think you would know it when the time comes for manufacturing and supply chain, and you realize there are fewer friction points when you kept it simple. So I think absolutely, I think what we've done is we've kept it as simple as we can for a first-time company. We fell into the trap initially of, we want this, and we want all these fancy things. And then we realized the difficulty of actually managing such a fancy, complex design. And so absolutely simple materials, simple components, and simple assembly, right? There's got nothing complex in it. So I think when Jim says simple, there are a few different parts of the process that could be applied to. So yeah, keeping it as simple as possible helped us and helped the end customer as well, both in terms of price, both in terms of repairability, replaceability. So yes, I would say that we've tried our best. I wouldn't make any claims, but I would say we've tried our best.
Now, I'm glad to hear that. And something one of the companies put in into the Q&A. I'm going to ask you now, Amrish, and also Jim and CY. But I'll start with you, Amrish, which is they were asking about design freeze. You just got to design freeze, or you're there now. So the question was, at what stage should we think about freezing the design? How do you decide when it's time to go to? How do you get to that decision, Amrish?
It's a very nervous moment in a company when you have to say, this is it. We're not making any more changes. So we've invested money. There will naturally be flaws in your first product. And as long as it doesn't compromise patient safety, I think we have to know what compromises we have to accept for design freeze. So we have to know this is the set of requirements, and if we meet the set of requirements, we freeze. It can't keep going on, because if you want to iterate, it can go on and on and on and on, and it's going to cost your company time and money. So it's come to a point where, I have to say, this is what we're going to deliver. It may not be for 100% of our customers. It may be good for maybe 60 to 80% of our customers. And then we look at filing special 510Ks, where we can then add on features, and we can go from there, right? So, yeah, absolutely. It's a very nervous moment, but I would say look at your initial customer, look at the initial set of requirements, and as soon as you touch that and you know that it's a safe, solid, reliable design, freeze it, because that's where it needs. Time is absolutely of the essence, and I don't think people realize how long it takes from design going through manufacturing validation, clinical trials, and that sort of thing. So I would say overestimate the amount of time it takes, and freezing your design as early as possible gives you the ability to deliver the product to at least a group of customers. May not be all your customers, to at least a group of your customers.
Yeah, thank you. And Jim, CY, anything you guys want to add on that topic about how you counsel your clients on when it's time for design freeze?
For me, Paul, again, finance and economics, I don't have a dog in the fight when it comes to design freeze. But what I can tell you is how much money you're spending by not freezing at a certain point, or having scope creep. That's where I'll generally advise. But I've often experienced the case where me telling a customer when to freeze a design is like me telling Leonardo da Vinci, it's one more stroke on your painting. I'm not the expert, but what I can say is cost. And I think, as Amrish mentioned, time is money. He also talked about, getting to get 80%. When you get to that 80%, you got to call it a day. But this is the thing about creation and innovation is people always want it to be perfect before they take it forward. And each day that they go, they'll say, here's another thing and another thing and another thing. And you'll get that from marketing. You'll get it from your investors. You'll get it from your supply chain team. So I think you really have to balance that based on the amount of money that you're spending. And, I know we see that. We see it a lot. I know CY can speak to it as well. We struggle with that sometimes, where a program we thought was going to freeze 6 months ago is what they call in the slush phase, and it drags. So it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, no, thank you. We only have like 5 more minutes or so in this first hour. So I just want to, close with a couple last things here. I know there's some questions from our cohort, and I think probably others who are watching this as well. If you've developed a device and gotten it approved in the Asia Pacific markets, are there any things that you should watch out for before moving to the US and Europe? And what about the reverse? If you develop something in the US, you want to bring it to APAC, are there any special considerations or something that you should think about? Or is it just, if you developed it in one place, it's going to be good everywhere? Any particular advice you'd give, Jim or CY, on that?
I'll defer to CY on that one.
Well, first thing that come into my mind is regulatory. So we work in a very highly regulated industry. So wherever your product move into a different country, different regions, first thing you have to take into consideration is on the regulatory, whether FDA is applying to these countries, or you need CE, or you need NMPA for China. So you need to have a good team or a good partner that work with, that can provide you a good solution and regulatory.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, great. And within scope of this conversation, the things that we've talked about, are there any, now that you guys have had a chance to listen to each other for the last 55 minutes or so, Amrish, I'm going to go to you first. Any things that any questions you have for Jim or CY? You've got these guys here. Anything you might want to ask them that you think other viewers out there would find interesting?
Actually, I think they covered quite a bit of the whole manufacturing and supply chain process. But I mean, would be good to know if Jabil do support on the quality and the regulatory side of the manufacturing, and also if it's a service that Jabil extends beyond the actual manufacturing itself. So, like you mentioned, you're a business unit. You capture quite a lot of services within the business unit, right? So, would love to know a little bit more.
Yeah, CY, I know you answer that question quite a bit in your discussions with customers, so I'll leave that to your side.
So, Amrish, your question is on how do we? Sorry, could you repeat your question?
So, I mean, beyond the manufacturing itself, the services that Jabil provides around the quality and the regulatory aspects. What are the services that Jabil could provide beyond the manufacturing itself? Quality and regulatory
of course,
of the product.
Yeah. Well, so we try to, we look into the value propositions of the entire product life cycle. So besides manufacturing, we also do a lot on the design. So JBL has a huge design team that, for different industry, we have a mechanical engineer, mechanical electronic software engineers. Even now we have people who is focusing on the cloud computing. So yeah, these are some of the additional services that we provide. And also, in different regions, we also have after sales market service. Your product that get, some product that get into the hospitals, that get into the market, that you need your partners to have a footprint in different regions to do the aftermarket sales service. JBL has that services as well.
CY, how about from a regulatory perspective? How do we guide the customers through that process?
Yeah, I would take examples for China. So a lot of time, we often say that now because of all these geopolitical reasons, products tend to be more localization than globalization. So different regions, like I mentioned earlier, regulatory is one of the key considerations for your product. So as a JBL, we work very closely with the China NMPA. So, and for instance, our facility in Shanghai, we are one of the selected. Well, we are the only facility that's appointed by the NMPA as a training center for NMPA inspector. So we have been working with NMPA for several years, and we are also one of the committee members that draft the regulatory policy for localization. So that's why JBL has not only on the relationship side, but also on the regulatory and know-how that we have supported and guided our customers how to land the product into this region. Likewise, we also have some of the APAC or China customers that wanted to put their product into the America, Europe region. So we have a regulatory team that help our customers on registrations, on to get a license and stuff like that.
No, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it's super helpful. Thank you. Good question, Amrish. All right, so we're hitting the hour mark here, so we've got to close out the YouTube portion. I wanted to thank our panelists. You guys have done a terrific job of sharing quite a bit of wisdom in a short period of time. So Amrish, let me start with you. Again, you're the CEO at Biorhythm. You guys are getting closer to getting to the market now. How can people reach out to you if they want to find you? Do they connect with you on LinkedIn? Is that a good way to find you, Amrish?
Yeah, LinkedIn, or you can connect with me via email at amrish@bio-rithm.com. So either way is good, and would love to connect with people out there.
Excellent. Great company. So I highly encourage people to do that. And Jim and CY, same question for you. If people want to reach out to you and get some of those early discussions going, how do they do that? Jim, start with you. How do they find you?
So LinkedIn is great. I love LinkedIn. It's great at connecting people. It's great at getting together. Also, the bio book, our contact information is always available in the bio book, or if you reach out to Paul Grand, he can give you our email addresses, and always looking forward to having a chat. So I really appreciate this tonight, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. And CY?
Yep, same. LinkedIn, works for me, and I think MedTech Innovator is definitely a good platform, to get network with each other. So you feel free to reach out. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank all three of you for the discussion. So YouTube audience, this is where you're wrapping up. Cohort, you guys stay on. We're going to do our private Q&A for the next 30 minutes. For those of you, again, on YouTube, thanks for joining us. You can find the whole schedule, both the archives and the future upcoming webinars at medtechinnovator.org/APAC Live, as well as our U.S. programs webinars, medtechinnovator.org/live. Both of those are great places to look because we have webinars that are open, both on the Asia Pacific program and the U.S. program. We even have a BioTools series as well, if you're interested in life science tools. So please check that out. We'll hope to see you again next week as we continue our discussions. So thanks, YouTube audience, for being here. And